I think we'll go ahead and start. I want to appreciate all of you for being here today. I want to thank you for that. This is First Tuesday in the Metro Archives, 12:30 to 1:30, the first Tuesday of every month. So we appreciate you being here. If you're watching on YouTube, we appreciate that. I want to thank Metro 3 for always coming to these. They do a lot of work for us, and we appreciate that very much. Today we have Dr. Carole Bucy. She's the Davidson County historian. She's also one of the editors on the Nashville Encyclopedia. She's a teacher, she's an educator, she's been in this world for a long time. And so today she's going to talk about public education in Nashville after the Civil War. I want to tell you about the next couple coming up before we have Carole up. In May 3rd, we'll have Richard Condon. He's with the, it's the Franklin Battlefield Trust, and he's going to come and talk about Pennsylvania Confederates, which I found very interesting, but apparently there was a lot of Pennsylvania troops that came down here to fight for the Confederacy. And my wife's folks are from Pennsylvania, so I was particularly interested in that. Yeah, don't tell anybody, Bob, and I don't want that out. Please don't tell anybody. Yeah.
I have no idea where they
June 7th, we're going to have Tom Vikstrom. He's the general manager of the Hermitage Hotel, and he's going to come and speak about the Hermitage. And it's fascinating. Tom has done a lot of work on the Hermitage Hotel and the history of it, so I think we'll have a good presentation then. So I want to appreciate everyone for being here. Of course, we'll send out updates and emails about this. And with anything further, I will turn it over to Dr. Bucy. Thank you for being here.
Today we're going to talk about Nashville schools, Davidson County schools. And as you may have heard me chatting earlier about this topic, it's really of great interest. And on the one hand, we see metropolitan schools as one unit. It's really been quite interesting for me to kind of look back and see how rural Davidson County actually was once upon a time when we had these two separate school systems, Nashville and Davidson County. And so I really want to pick up with the Civil War and get us up through integration and the building of the comprehensive high schools here in metropolitan Nashville. After the Civil War, Nashville had this public school system, and the only education out in the county at all really were a few here and there women who might teach reading and writing more or less in their homes. They didn't really have formal schools in any parts of the county other than Nashville until after the Civil War. The University of Nashville had a prep school for young men. The Nashville Female Academy had closed during the Civil War and never reopened. Ward Seminary more or less replaced it. But although Nashville had this history of private education, the city of Nashville, led by some very far-sighted influential people, had created a public school system before the Civil War. So they had brought down a man who had lived in several different places, but most recently Mississippi and Memphis, to be the superintendent of the director of this little fledgling tiny school system. He was a unionist because he was from Connecticut and Massachusetts, and so as soon as the Civil War broke out, he and his daughters left here and went to Michigan for safety. He returned, Joshua Pearl is his name. He returned to Nashville after the Civil War, but he didn't really stay very long. He had some health issues, and he struggled with getting the schools going. He also struggled with what is a perennial problem, getting enough money to run the schools and pay the teachers. But the system was in place, and by the 1880s, you see this city system actually doing reports to the Board of Education. And so they have, by 1888, they have 9 grammar schools and 1 high school. This information is actually harder to deal with. Some of the numbers, you're going to see the chart I made the other day. It's harder to deal with than you might expect, because in a lot of parts of the county as well as the city, some schools that are labeled elementary went through grades 9 and in some cases grades 10. So it's an interesting thing to wonder what grades were being taught, and that's an area that I really hope I can do some more research on. But these are names that are actually kind of familiar to you. Fogg School, Howard School, Hume School, Tarbox, Main Street, Hines, Caldwell, and the 9th Ward. And Nashville started an African American high school fairly quickly. The Board of Education of the city started Pearl High School. It was done at the request of the African American community. Nashville had, before the Civil War, had a very established, small but active African American elite made up of free blacks who lived here in the city, and they had managed to educate their children, and so one of their very, very earliest requests was that we have a public school for African Americans. So Pearl School became the African American high school in 1988. It had its first graduation, and it graduated a nice class of 7 students, 4 boys, 4 girls, and 3 boys. Hume, the high school here, had a graduation, and their graduation was slightly higher, but there weren't really a lot of students going to high school for the high school graduation. There's the 1889 program from the Fogg School, our city high school for white students, their graduation program, and you see the 1902 image of the high school graduating class. They had their graduation at the Vendome Theater. Wouldn't it have been fun to go to the Vendome Theater? The Pearl High School had its first graduation in the Masonic Hall. And an interesting thing to consider is the Masonic Hall, by this time, 1888, Nashville was so segregated. It's interesting to consider that the Masonic Lodge was open enough that they were willing to allow Pearl School to have their graduation in the Masonic Hall there, which was quite a big thing. There are the names of the schools that you see that were here. And out in the county, it was pretty much whatever the people in a place wanted to do. And so I want you to imagine for a minute the map of Nashville, and you can see where the communities are established. They will have a post office, and then there'll be a church generally first, then a post office, and then eventually a school. And so you look at going from the very south, you have Antioch, which was really remote, but they managed to be on the railroad line, so they wanted a school, and they will start a school out there just completely independently of anybody else. You've got enough parents who want their kids educated, they will create a school. And the people in Antioch were pretty proactive, I've got to say, up into the 20th century, because when the county organized a county high school, the first of which was Central High over on Raines Avenue, the Antioch parents quickly protested and said, it's too far for our children to have to ride in a wagon to go to Central High. We want a high school in Antioch for our students so they won't have to ride the wagon so long to get up to town to Central High, which Central High seems to us, or Raines Avenue, which is where WNPT has their headquarters there by the fairgrounds, seems the middle of Nashville to me, but that was a county school. So going around, Hillsborough High will be established a little bit later. You've got Antioch, and then you keep going west and you come to Bellevue. and Bellevue had its own little community out there, but they are not one of the first schools. And then you just keep going around, and Bellevue was part of this Harpeth Valley. I won't even call it exactly a community. Would you, Bob? Would you call Harpeth Valley? No, but it was just it was just the people who lived out there. And you know, you've got the Brick Church Pike. The Jerry Baxter was more towards Madison and up in that direction, Bordeaux. And these schools were established completely independently. And so the county court in 1907 decided to create a board of education and establish some authority over these little independent districts that had been self-created. Well, there was a lot of interest in education reform in the early 1900s because, keep in mind, from your American history class, you remember the Progressive era. So education was one of those progressive reforms. We need unified educational opportunity for all American children. And so in Tennessee, the legislature is going to begin hearing a lot of people coming in saying the legislature, the Tennessee General Assembly, needs to do something to make sure that every child in every county of Tennessee has access to schools. Well, of course, as the case of any idea that the General Assembly gets brought before it, you've got to have an advocate. And up at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, we had a very interesting advocate for public education, Philander P. Claxton. Claxton was born in Bedford County. He had gone to the University of Tennessee, had worked on a PhD at Johns Hopkins, earned a PhD at Bates College, and then went to North Carolina, where he became the superintendent of North Carolina schools. So then he became a professor at the University of Tennessee. Now, he was a professor. His tenure was in Teutonic languages, German. And yet he was very interested in education. So he becomes more or less what I would call a one-man Department of Education for the University of Tennessee. But he really feels that education is a necessity if the state is ever going to move forward and progress into a New South state. We have to have an education system. So he starts spreading the word that we need education reforms. Our governor, at the time he starts talking about educational reforms, was Malcolm Patterson. And everybody in this room knows Malcolm Patterson, not because of his educational reforms, but because of his conflict with Senator Edward Ward Carmack. But yet Patterson had a lot of progressive ideas he wanted to implement. Unfortunately, he opposed prohibition, and so that made a lot of rural Tennesseans and others quite angry with him. But he did persuade the legislature before he went out of office, before he was defeated by the Republican Ben Hooper. He persuaded legislatures to pass the first really massive General Education Act. We had some bills passed. When Andrew Johnson was the state governor, not the military governor, he had gotten an education bill passed, but there was no funding for it. After the Civil War, when they rewrote a convention was held to rewrite the state constitution, it created a poll tax for education, but that was about as far as it would go. So Patterson's proposal, the General Education Act of 1909, became the core of Tennessee's present state school system, and it really came up with a way to fund the schools. Now, if you look at these numbers, this is really quite remarkable. He called, and this was passed by the General Assembly, an annual appropriation of 25% of the gross revenue of the state of Tennessee for education. 66% of that would go to the counties in proportion to their school-age population. So more students, you get a little more money, and then you're going to, some of this money was going to be set aside to create 3 teachers' college. Normal colleges were teachers' colleges, and then the rest was going for building something that everybody here will love, libraries, and maintaining the high schools. So here you see one of these normal colleges is going to be for African Americans, and there was a competition between several cities in Tennessee for being able to have that state institution put in their own city. But Nashville won that competition, and the Tennessee Agricultural and Industrial School was created to provide educational training for teachers in the state. So this got things going, and it really, as much as anything, it provided members of the General Assembly in the future a platform from which they could launch more initiatives and more reforms. So Ben Hooper, the Republican, probably was Tennessee's purist, I suppose would be the word I would use, progressive governor. He had lots and lots of reforms he wanted to get passed, a Highway Act, schools, several different programs, but he had been elected with the support of the conservative faction of the Democratic Party, the Bourbons as they were often called, and he had Democratic support, and the Democrats controlled the state legislature. So as a result of that, he didn't get any of his package really passed, except for schools reform. This is his big accomplishment. This 1915 bill required a high school in every county of the state. Teachers were complaining about this, but they did it. Exams and certification of teachers, compulsory education, and local school boards that will be a part of the county system. So here this set the system up. Now, in Nashville, we've got Hilary House as our mayor at the time this takes place. And Hilary House had really campaigned when he ran for office that he was in support of the schools. He was very much one who wanted African American votes. He promised African American schools. But in 1915, in addition to this, Governor Hooper and the legislature, with those pro-prohibition forces in the legislature, also passed the ouster law. And the ouster law was really passed because there were 2 people in Tennessee who flaunted not enforcing prohibition. One was the mayor of Memphis, whose name was Edward Crump, and the other was the mayor of Nashville, Hilary House. And Hilary House he was ejected from office, but unlike Crump, who created his own political machine, House came back and ran again and served a nice second long period of time as the mayor of Nashville. Well, meanwhile, you've got the city schools and you've got this county system. And so Hilary House is going to be working on the city schools, and the county courts are going to be working on the county system as well. And so soon you're getting real high schools here. Now I want to pass by my civil rights slides for just a minute and show you the chart that I made. So I'm quickly going to get through these and show you my chart. And the numbers I'm pretty confident about, but I'm not sure that I haven't left somebody out. This took some research into state education reports. But I do think this is kind of interesting because the county, Davidson County, in 1915, the year that Governor Hooper got his education reform package through the General Assembly, they created Central High, and they bought property and built the building. I'll show you a picture of Central High in just a minute. A few years later, in a kind of a remote part of the county, looked upon as the other side of the Cumberland River, where this Hyde's Ferry connected one side of the river with the other. Cumberland High School was built there. It was really one of these schools that I think started out as a 10-grade school, thus it got eventually named a junior high, and there was no real recollection of this, but it was designated as a proper high school in 1920. And then you see that parts of the county are going to, well, we want a high school too. So Donaldson got a high school, a county high school. Goodlettsville, you see Hillsborough, not until 1939. Hillwood, not until after World War II. Isaac Lytton, 1930. Now, Isaac Lytton, let me tell you, that high school, which was over on the Nashville Pike Gallatin Road, it was the showplace of Tennessee high schools. Look at the numbers of the enrollment at Isaac Lytton. In 1960, they had 2,100 students in 6 grades. They had a marching band that was always invited to the Rose Bowl, the New York parades, the Washington parades. They had quite an elite faculty there. It was quite a showplace, and it's kind of interesting to consider that you have this school, Isaac Lytton, in that Madison, Englewood area on the Gallatin Pike, and you see also in that community at the same time the Madison Church of Christ, which it grows bigger and bigger as the religious institution of that area, when Reverend Ira North was the minister of the Madison Church of Christ. But not too far from there, Maplewood High School was created in the 50s, as was Overton, and then Stratford in 1961. So these were the county high schools, and they reported to the County Board of Education. And when people started talking about consolidating the city and the county governments, and this conversation began in 1952 with a joint planning commission report called the Future for Nashville report. People were very concerned about the schools. That was the big concern of the people living in the city as well as the people living in the county. So as a result of this, finally the delegates to the Tennessee General Assembly, the representatives from Davidson County's districts as well as the districts in the city of Nashville, lobbied the General Assembly to give Nashville and Davidson County the authority to create a commission to possibly consolidate the two governments, the city government and the county government. And one of the reasons that a lot of the county people were interested in this was because they felt that even though the population was moving out to suburbia in these county schools, that the county didn't have the money, the resources to build enough schools and provide enough classrooms. There was overcrowding, and the county couldn't seem to get the buildings built. And so you have a lot of parents who are saying, we need something done about the county schools. If we, the county, can't do anything, they need schools. Now, the mayor of Nashville was Ben West. He had succeeded Tom Cummings, and he was a very forward-thinking man, and he saw that he was experiencing a lot of people, a lot of movement outside the city, and a decrease in the tax dollars. So he realized that his city schools were going to have financial troubles down the road. So a commission was created, 5 representatives of the county and 5 from the city, to create a plan for unifying the city and county governments, one government. It was very popular. The newspapers, the Nashville Tennessean and the Nashville Banner, the editors both supported it. The mayor of the city and the county judge, Beverly Briley, both supported consolidation. And when the charter was written and it was sent to the voters for ratification, for approval, to everybody's surprise, it failed in the county. And I think one of the reasons that it failed in the county, timing is everything. And the timing took place right after Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka. And Tennessee was, and other southern states as well, were really worried about this happening. And they were very concerned. Now, to Tennessee's credit, when Senator Strom Thurmond from South Carolina demanded that a document be signed by Southern congressmen protesting the Brown decision, Senator Albert Gore Jr., Senator Estes Kefauver, and J. Percy Priest and a couple of other representatives, but Percy Priest represented our district here, the 5th District, refused to sign this Southern Manifesto saying that the Supreme Court had no authority to interfere in activities going on inside a state's border. And so you see hostility created to that right here in Nashville almost immediately. And our governor is Frank Clement. He is saying we are going to obey the law and do what's right. Ben West says the same thing. Beverly Briley says the very same thing. But saying we are going to be obeying the law and moving forward are two different things. And so in 1955, the city council, not the county courts, but the city council passed what became known as the stair-step plan. It was integrate one grade at a time in Nashville. It was going to take 12 years to integrate 12 grades, but it was going to be implemented. And the city council really felt that this was gradual and was going to work. Well, meanwhile, over in East Nashville is A.Z. Kelly, who happens to be a barber, but his son, who is African American, has to be driven by the very fine East High School to get over to Pearl. And he thought that this plan, the 12 grade plan, was too slow, too little, too late. And so he, with the help of 2 very fine lawyers, Z. Alexander Luby and Avon Williams, they represented the Kelly family in court. They brought suit against the Board of Education of Nashville about integrating the Nashville schools. Now, meanwhile, you got a lot of noise being made by people who do not want the schools integrated, and you can really now, if you can kind of put the two timelines, the metro government timeline and school integration on the same timeline, you can really kind of see what the hesitation was. And, you know, Strom Thurmond came here to speak. James Eastland from Mississippi came here to speak, saying, don't allow your schools to be integrated. And so in 1956, before any students have attended there have been any integrated classes in Nashville schools, the school board has lots and lots of meetings where parents are lining the school board room to protest integration. Meanwhile, 150 miles east of here, in Clinton, Tennessee, in Anderson County, Clinton had decided to go ahead and integrate their high school right then and there in 1956, simply because their students, there was no high school for African Americans in Anderson County, and their students had to be driven into Knoxville to attend high school. And so it seemed to be accepted in the community. It seemed to be an easy thing to accomplish. There was no real opposition to integrating Clinton High School until John Casper appeared on the scene. Now, our governor is Frank Clement. He is saying over and over again, we will obey the law in Tennessee. But in 1956, Casper convinced people who had no opposition to integration, or no vocal opposition, I should say, I suppose. He convinced them that they had an axe to grind, and he went to Clinton High School and did everything in his power to stir up trouble and opposition to these students attending the school. They did attend the school throughout the year. There were a few that were seniors, and they graduated from Clinton High School. And the thing about Clinton that's quite different from what happened in Little Rock is that Clinton did this fairly peacefully. There was a bomb that was set off at the high school a year after the school was fully integrated. But John Casper is a person who's one of the most elusive people in history. He was an ardent segregationist. He seems to have been from New Jersey. He was in and out of Nashville quite a bit in the 50s and 60s, promoting a segregationist agenda. And so after this school board meeting, when the city says first grade will be integrated in the fall of 1957, John Casper is here, the schools are going to be integrated, and John Casper is here to keep things stirred up. Now, I guess I should explain how the integration of the schools, the city schools, was going to be. If you are an African American parent and you want your children to go to the city school that is closest to your house, you may voluntarily enroll your child in that school. Now, this was not mandatory, it was completely voluntary, and I can only imagine how terrified those African American parents and children were the day that that school opened in 1957. Before John Edgerton died, he became very interested in this subject, and he and the public library here of Nashville did a very fine little 15 or 20 minute documentary called "And a Child Shall Lead Them" about the integration of Nashville schools that fall of 1957. Because unfortunately, after the first day of school, after the schools had been integrated and the children had gone and gotten enrolled, a bomb was set off that went off at midnight at Hattie Cotton School over in East Nashville. It was deliberately set to go off when nobody was in the building, but the damage was severe, and the bomb did serve its intended result, which was to convince several of these African American families maybe their children shouldn't be in that white school because it may be too dangerous. But this was what was in the news. And Nashville, quite frankly, I'm sure some of you have heard John Siegenthaler talk about this before he died. John Edgerton talked about this before he died. The city was frankly stunned with John Casper here and the racial hatred that came out after John Casper convinced white people that they had a problem. They weren't so convinced that there was much going on until somebody kind of really stirs the pot, and John Casper certainly did stir the pot. So Ben West, he is the mayor. Beverly Briley is the county judge. Ben West has his tax base being eroded, and he's got to take care of his school system as well. Ben West had supported consolidation of the government, but when it failed, he took the vote against consolidation as the final vote. So what did Ben West do that really angered Nashville? Two things. First of all, he began large annexations, and he had to get permission to do this from the state legislature. He began annexing large parts of the county. He had 2 different annexations, and this really angered people who had moved to suburbia thinking they were in the county. And it looked like he was going to gobble up the whole county. And this, you see several parts of the county saying, let's incorporate and create an incorporated city here so that we can prevent the city of Nashville from gobbling up our area. That made a lot of people angry. Well, he had a revenue source that seemed to make sense to a lot of people if you lived in Nashville, but if you lived in the county, his new revenue stream was very unpopular. It was a wheel tax on every car that came into Davidson County to work. And it was called the green sticker tax because you had to have a sticker on your car. You had to pay this wheel tax. And there is some logic to this. The people in the counties used our public libraries. They used our airport. They used everything that was going on here in Nashville, the parks, the services, and yet they weren't helping to pay for those things. Well, you couldn't have said the communists are coming to Nashville fast enough, because people, anything in the 50s, many of you remember the 50s, anything you don't like, all you have to do is say, must be the communists. I remember as a child, we were terrified the communists were coming to get us, and we were taught that in school. And so people were so outraged by this that they started calling for, let's have another go at a consolidation. Let's have another go at creating metropolitan government. So another commission was appointed. In 1962, they held 70-something meetings, public meetings, about what was in this charter. The biggest concern at the public meetings was schools. How would the schools be consolidated now that we're integrating the schools in the area? And so the one big difference between this charter in 62 and the 57 charter was that this new charter expanded the size of the council. The council under the 1957 charter was going to be 21 people, and this charter was going to have 40 people plus a vice mayor. So this time, with the mayor, Ben West, opposing it, with the banner opposing it, a well-organized citizen campaign got the votes out, and in 1962, Nashville and Davidson County consolidated their government to become the first city and county in the nation to consolidate all of their governmental services. Miami-Dade County had consolidated some parts, but nobody had consolidated all of their government. So as a result of this, they wisely decided that we're going to have about a 2-year transition period. We're going to operate 2 school systems and really go about this very deliberately and trying to make sure that we provide all the children in the county the same quality of education. And so out of this conversation of consolidating the school systems came the notion that we really need to make some changes in our high school system. And we know that we're going to have to come up with a plan for integration, for a comprehensive integration plan. So the idea was floated that we have comprehensive high schools. And the plan was, in this, it was a desegregation plan that you would have elementary schools on the edge of this big circle. Imagine Briley Parkway as a big circle in Davidson County. And around that circle, there would be comprehensive high schools. And the plan was that these campuses would have a lot of students. The plan was for 12 comprehensive high schools. This meant that some of these areas were, like Bellevue, for instance, was going to have to give up their high school, that the comprehensive high school would become Hillwood. But this was the plan. McGavock High School opened, and it was the showplace of the city for a brief period of time. The whole notion of having a lot of students in a high school, the theory behind that was if you have a higher number of students, you can offer more courses. In other words, at a high school with only 500 students, you really couldn't offer Spanish, French, Latin, German, Russian, and at McGavock, their foreign language department was enormous. There was a full-time Russian teacher at McGavock High School. They had all manner of vocational programs as well as academic programs, lots of science courses, math courses, but eventually I think that comprehensive high schools more or less went out of style simply because the numbers of students, they realized that maybe having 2,000 students in one school is not such a good idea. So that idea came and went. I'm going to show you a few pictures. Here is John Casper right in Nashville. He was in Clinton in '56, he was in Nashville in '57. And he's telling these people, you have an axe to grind. Get mad, get out and do something. And a lot of people listened to what he had to say. So all of these schools between 60 and 70 over here on the your right-hand side of the screen, you see how consolidation of the government affected the enrollment of those schools. Isaac Litton, a lot of the Isaac Litton students ended up going to McGavock. Hume Fogg, as it was called by this time, the city school, had already been made a vocational school, and so Hume Fogg was a vocational school until it became an academic magnet. But you see the enrollment of these schools going, and these new schools that were created right before consolidation, they had pretty hefty enrollments there as well. Here are the city schools that were in place. Cameron has a kind of an interesting history in that it became a high school, and then it went back to being a junior high. Cone, the very same way. It was named for a woman who had been an advocate for junior highs in the 1930s. And her advocacy of junior highs convinced the Board of Education of the city to create a junior high over on Charlotte Avenue that became a high school after the government was consolidated, after the creation of Metro. East Nashville, North Nashville, and West End were these schools that were going to kind of take the pressure off of Hume Fogg and distribute the students a little more geographically than they had been distributed in the city before. And so as a result of consolidation, West End will become a middle school, as it is called. Now, here are some images that I thought you would find interesting of these various schools. Finding these pictures is really much more challenging than you might think. This was the school that the city created that was finally built before the Great Depression for the city high school and it was Hume Fogg. This was a photograph that I think was touched up, but you see what kind of cars were around the school. You see the trolley tracks here as well. The old Howard School, which is now one of the main campuses of Metro government, it's now the Fulton campus. But we think of that building that kind of looks like a school building that says Howard on it, that faces 2nd Avenue, as the original Howard School. But no, this was the school that was in the South Nashville school system that wasn't a part of Nashville until right before the Civil War. So I think that's a rather interesting structure with that tower in the middle. And of course, these were largely what I guess I would call four-square structures. This school particularly, you have 4 classrooms on each floor. And so that was how that school was designed. Antioch High School, Antioch got a high school in 1907 when the county created their Board of Education, but I haven't been able to find an image of the original Antioch High School, and this is the Antioch school that was there in 1933. Interestingly enough, some of these county schools that no longer exist have really robust alumni associations going, so I'm hoping they will help me here eventually. Central High, the county school, we've got better images of it than any of the rest. This was quite a showplace, and the center part of the building was built, and then they built a library on one end and a gym, and it was quite a fine school. A lot of the people in Nashville, Ben West and I think Richard Fulton also went to Central High. I may be wrong about that, but we have a lot of people going through this school, and they have a museum over at, they have a museum now, and the Central High alums have done a lot of work to help Glencliff High School out in recent years. But sports were always a part of the educational institutions. I love this picture. They're right, the baseball team posing in front of the roller coaster at the fairgrounds. That was not on school property. I've been trying to find a picture of Cumberland High, and Ken found this for me just yesterday. And I think one of the reasons Cumberland High I've had a hard time finding a picture of it is because it really was one of those 10-grade schools. And so this picture has it identified as Cumberland Junior High, but this was a school in a part of the county where people had a hard time getting across the Cumberland River. This is the image of the old Bellevue school. Now, Bellevue is kind of an interesting place because the post office was there before the school, and the post office was Bellevue, V-I-E-W, and then the first real high school became V-U-E, so figure that one out. Bob can explain the pluses and minuses of that argument in Bellevue. I'm sure it was a very heated argument at the time that argument took place. I found this picture, Woodmont School, which was built by the county. Woodmont School was on Estes, which seems to be the middle of downtown, not the middle of downtown, but it seems to be Nashville. But no, it was a suburban county school when it was created there. Hillsborough High School, another county high school. The most memorable thing that happened at the old Hillsborough High School was that it burned, and there are a lot of people around who remember where they were the night that the school caught on fire and burned down. So the school, after the fire, they had classes in churches and several other places until the present building got built and finished. Now they're talking about building another Hillsborough High School on the back side of that lot. Here is Cone School, which was over on Charlotte, and Metro has kept this building in use for community education classes, ESOL classes. A lot of classes are offered there. I think it's really a nice school simply because it had this big park right in front of the school, which was a nice added feature for the neighborhood. Mrs. Cone died before her husband did, and her husband left this school a fine library as well, money for a fine library, I should say, and money for an organ. So this school had an auditorium with an organ in it, and I'm really curious as to if the organ is still there and what condition it is in, if it is indeed in that building. There is the original Pearl School, which was an all-grades school, and when Pearl got a new high school building, Howard School was in this building for a while. There is the newer high school for Pearl High School, and it is now Martin Luther King Science and Math Magnet School. It's a magnificent building, and you really learn a lot of African American history by just seeing the images on the wall there, who were the students there and who the faculty was. There is the faculty of Cameron School, totally segregated faculty in 1947. Of course, that's the way the African American schools and the other schools operated as well. But these folks all had very fine educations. They were very interested in education themselves and were very committed to using education to improve African American living conditions and working conditions in the city. And so the city integrated peacefully, perhaps not as quickly as we should, certainly not as quickly as we should have, but we did escape the violence that took place in other southern cities simply because we had a group of leaders from the African American community and the existing government of Nashville who worked together. The City Council of Nashville had had African Americans on the council for a good long period of time. The county understood, the county court understood that there were pockets of African Americans that needed education in various parts of the county. And by and large, the citizens of Nashville really did what they felt was right. We had a candidate for mayor, I guess this was in the early 80s, who was really quite pro-segregation, and he was defeated. He ran a rather robust campaign for mayor, but he was defeated. And I think the quality of the schools here is actually quite good. As many of you know that I live in Davidson County, but I teach in Gallatin at Volunteer State Community College, and the metro schools have produced, whatever school it is, they produce some very, very fine students, and Metro today has some teachers who are really quite committed to making sure that every student in our county has a quality educational experience. I think our Metro Council is committed to that. I think our mayor is committed to that, and I think our business leaders are as well. So hopefully we will move forward here in this new century and take our schools even further. Thank you very much.